Hopefully this madness stops. Hopefully we ain't got to deal with this no more. But a dude's face being broken 2 spots is amazing to me.
In this corner, standing at 6'5", weight class unknown, but hailing from the city of sin, put your hands together for Jamieson Welsh. And in this corner, standing at 5'10", weighing in at pounds, and coming to us from his super secret bunker with no AC in Tucson, Arizona, put your hands together for Luis Montemayor.
All right, thank you. Welcome back to another episode of the Mixed Company Podcast. Of course, I'm one half of the show, Jamieson, joined by Luis. Luis, what's going on, man?
And Jamieson, I am so excited to be here for our very first episode of 2026. So excited about the new year, excited about the world of boxing. I take this show seriously. So this is airing on January 1st. I behaved myself last night very much, so I'm not hungover for the show at all. So Happy New Year to you, Jamieson. And Happy New Year to a very special guest that we have today. We have an award-winning boxing journalist who is going to join us today and recap the year. Please welcome to the ring, Miss Gayle Falkenthal.
Happy New Year, everybody. What a great way to start it off. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And, I say boxing journalist, but, there's more to you. You're a commentator, you're an editor. You've done, is it PR consulting? I mean, you do so much. Like, I didn't want to overload with credits, but just give us a little bit about, what you want to tell the people, what you do, your interests are, and, what you want to put out there.
Well, we'll make it simple because we're really here to talk about boxing, not about me. But just for the credit list, I'm based in San Diego, California, where I grew up in a household with a boxing crazy dad. And being in San Diego and before the days of streaming and really before the days of a lot of cable, we watched a lot of TV, both from our side of the border, and you could watch all the stations in Tijuana. So what's on TV in Mexico? It's pretty much telenovelas, soccer, and boxing. So I grew up with that, and it's a region, funny enough, without a lot of major fights or fighters, but a tremendous interest in boxing. And my best girlhood friend was a Latina girl who loved boxing just as much as me. And I always wanted to be a sports journalist, but I was really a little too early. I was born a little too early for a lot of women getting into sports writing or sportscasting. Unless you covered tennis, gymnastics, figure skating, not that there's anything wrong with that. I watch them all, but I ended up going just into straight broadcast journalism and print journalism for most of my career. But I left the news business because I actually wanted to make some money. And I know all of you out there who do this understand. So I eventually got into the public relations side of things and eventually started my own PR firm. But that siren call was always still out there. And I got a little part-time gig on a new online news site. At first, just writing media commentary. But I had the opportunity to fill in for our sports editor to go cover a fight in Las Vegas. And it was Pacquiao Marquez 3, and he never got his job back. And that's my story in a nutshell. So for the last 15 years, I've been doing this, again, as a side job, which is the best way to cover boxing when you do not need it to pay your mortgage. So that has been a good thing. And it's benefited me to be able to see my side of that profession from both ends, watching all of those folks we deal with on the PR side in boxing, dealing with us, and hopefully keep my writing and commentating and communication skills sharp. But what a fun time to be in, to see a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of ugly, a lot of excitement. There's always a knockout around the corner to save things for us.
Absolutely. And yes, we are here to talk about boxing, but we're not here to talk about you, because I'm also curious about were there any particular fights or fighters that you're really a fan of that really got you into the sport, or was it just because it was on all the time?
I've always enjoyed watching a lot of the Mexican and Mexican-American fighters in Southern California. I will say, because the first fight I ever saw ringside featured Manny Pacquiao, who was already a pretty big star. I admit, along the way, he's always been one of my very favorite fighters. We all grew up watching Oscar De La Hoya, and of course we watched Manny destroy Oscar. So that was a lot of fun. And I have enjoyed watching the wave of Eastern European fighters become big stars in the United States. Starting with guys like, well, of course, you had Vladimir Klitschko back in the day. The one I really got to know because he ended up stationing himself in Southern California for a lot of his career was Gennady Golovkin, who's, I think you see his glove over there over my shoulder. And I also was very well acquainted with his trainer at the time, Abel Sanchez, who is from the San Diego area, who after he took Terry Norris to fame, he kind of retired, and he's a building contractor by skill set. So he builds houses and stuff like that. And then he retired again a second time, and he's been drawn back in. So that's been a fun story. I also, of course, always enjoyed watching even the kind of no-name guys that come out of Mexico, watching fights on Mexican TV from places like Big Punch Arena, right? Where you've seen a lot of the greats. And Eric Morales obviously was a big favorite. All the Mexican wars. I've always enjoyed the smaller weight divisions, I think in part because we did watch so many of the greatest fighters from Mexico. They're in the lower weight divisions. I've always had a soft spot along the way for Jorge Arce. I keep voting for him to get in the Hall of Fame. I'm crossing my fingers one of these days everybody will recognize what a great fighter he was. And to this day, I still have an enormous admiration for the lower weight divisions, and am so pleased to see one of the biggest stars in the sport being in that lower tier of weight divisions. And I think of that as anything featherweight and under. And one of our biggest emerging stars also being from that division. And will there ever be a collision course between Naoya Inoue and Bam Rodriguez? We will see.
You and I personally, we have a lot of similarities there because I'm Mexican American, grew up watching Julio Cesar Chavez, so I've always kind of related to the little guys. So, but at the end of the day as well, I just love watching fights. I'll put one on even if I don't know the name. So,
sometimes the no-name guys, the even matchups down on the early fights on a card deliver the best action, or just these guys have nothing to lose. They let it rip. And it's a ton of fun. And, this is not to say I don't love a good heavyweight fight, a great spectacular heavyweight knockout by any means. That's a part of the sport too. And I firmly believe the cliche that when the heavyweight division is healthy, boxing is healthy. But how can you not love the speed, the offensive aggression, the punch output, the movement? That's something the smaller weight division fighters at the highest level deliver. That a guy having to move 250 pounds around a ring just cannot do it. I think that's why I've also really always loved that sort of middleweight division grounds, middleweight right there at the center, because it's the intersection of both. It's the intersection of guys who still have plenty of speed and hand speed, but still have tremendous power up at that size. And, maybe that's why I was always such a big fan of Golovkin, of Canelo Alvarez when he was sitting at that weight class, which I firmly think were his best days. And I'm so disappointed right now with the middleweight division. There's just, the next generation of talent hasn't emerged. Yeah, we've got champions there, but not they aren't the men that we remember of this glamour division at all. So either step up, guys, or move aside.
Well, Jamieson and I critique the boxing world a lot because we love it and we want it to be, it's the best sport in the world and we want it to be the best and live up to it. So I can definitely appreciate where you're coming from and I definitely appreciate your passion for the sport. It's phenomenal.
Hey, if we don't tell the truth about it, what's the point, right? We love it even with all its warts and flaws, and we all know what they are. But when a great fight goes down, there's not truly, to me, there's nothing more exciting in the world of sports. And I love sports, but there's nothing like, the excitement of a big win in a meaningful prize fight.
100% agree. 100% agree. So that's kind of a good transition for where we're going next. I wanted to get your thoughts on boxing as a whole in 2025. Just this past year, we had some great fights. We had some lulls. We talked about the good and the bad. Really love you talking about the lack of stars in the middle division there. But I mean, what do you see as a whole in terms of where boxing is? Because I think it's harder to find because Top Rank isn't on TV. Everything is on streaming. Are we at a low point? Are we at a new opportunity for something different and exciting? Like, what's your take on it for what you've seen this past year?
I think boxing has a lot of potential, and we're in a transition period. So we don't really know where we're going from where we've been. We are at a point now where in the United States, there is no linear or cable television outlet showing boxing for the first time. That's a culture shock for a lot of people. Top Rank has left ESPN as of the end of August, July, somewhere in the summer. They still don't have a home. Their fighters still don't have a home. Now, Top Rank has placed their guys and a few women on other cards. They are getting out there, they are fighting, but they are not under the Top Rank banner, and they're relying on the charity and matchups of the other promoters. So they're doing what they can, but boy, I sure hope they find a home soon and it isn't on some, third tier cable network. On the other hand, the potential for streaming has been a plus in so many ways. There is no way 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, I could have imagined being able to see fight cards live from around the world in real time, whether that meant I was getting up at 3 a.m. to watch them from Japan, didn't matter because streaming has allowed us that access. And sometimes it's a grainy YouTube channel, and sometimes it's a kind of a sketchy, I don't know what it is, and they want me to pay $5 for it. And then, of course, there are the big operators, broadcasting around the world. But we, the fan, have more access to worldwide boxing than we ever did before. The problem is when there's a price tag attached to a lot of it that really prices out the average fan. How much can you expect the average person trying to pay their bills to cough up if you really want to watch every significant fight, every decent pay-per-view card? We're talking hundreds of dollars a year. And while I do not advocate piracy or streaming because these guys need to make a living and need to make a profit, or the fighters don't get fights and they don't get paid. But the fans can only be hit up for so much. The promises that were made to us, remember, pay-per-view is dead. Pay-per-view is dead. And that's the same network now asking someone to pay close to $500 a year. Oh, but you're going to get all your pay-per-views free. Well, what if you don't want to watch all those pay-per-views? It doesn't matter. That's a model, digital delivery of content, entertainment, sports, what have you, it is still in some ways finding its way. The good news is some of the big streaming operations that didn't establish themselves to get into the business of sportscasting are figuring out that live sports is a huge draw for its other content. So you have the players like Netflix and Prime Video coming in, and I'm okay with that as long as they can continue to offer it primarily as part of a subscription package. Netflix seems inclined to hand us these big cards, these stunt cards. Prime Video, a little less, but we have had some good cards with just your subscription. I'm hopeful that this all sorts itself out, calms down, realizes they've got to have fan eyes on these things without attaching dollars all the time to keep the sport healthy. You also have that infusion, the last couple of years of money from the Middle East, specifically from Saudi Arabia. And the Turkey Al Sheikhs and the Saudi General Entertainment Authority have a completely different business model. They don't need to make a profit. This is a marketing expense for them. This is a tactic to get people to consider vacations, high-end tourism in the Middle East, specifically in Saudi. And it's also aimed at the British and European market of people who might invest, who might buy a vacation home. We don't see that in the United States. I mean, we are getting that benefit without, being played to. Although there is the political aspect, we could go down that rabbit hole, and I don't want to start our year doing that. We're going to have plenty of time to consider that, because we are seeing the Saudis partnering in a new venture, which was one of the big stories of 2025, with Dana White, who's always wanted to get into boxing, but he wants to bring the UFC business model to boxing. That's going to take some political will and a change in legislation, specifically with the Ali Act. I am interested to see how that plays out. I'm concerned about it. I want to see what eventually happens. Obviously, the current promoters, they still want the infusion of Saudi money, but they don't want to see a single entity taking over. Zuffa was starting to sign boxers to its roster. They aren't going to be the big stars. The big stars are not going to want to operate under that pay scale. So for a while, it's going to be a development league. I'm okay with that. It looks like the first event is going to be at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. It's kind of an odd spot for your first big fight under your new banner. It's at the Apex, but we'll see that in late this month. But let's see how much patience and how much money the Saudis want to sink in. If it's nothing but development fights, prospects, it's going to be a better promoted version of Pro Box. And Pro Box delivers some absolutely great cards, but nobody pretends Pro Box is putting on Inoue and Nakataki or Crawford and Canelo. So let's see what happens.
That's fair. And we've had a lot of conversations about, or how uneasy we are about the Middle East money coming in, the Saudi money and Dana White. But and I got more to ask, but I don't want to monopolize the interview. Jamieson, please jump in here.
So, Gayle, quick question. If you were boxing's commissioner, what would you do in this situation regarding the streaming, regarding where the money's coming from? Is there anything that you would do or you would change for everything that you know of at the moment?
The first thing I do is you do have an audience you're leaving behind with streaming only. So we need to see some kind of broadcast pickup from this. And I'm not sure why it hasn't happened. Back in the depths of my mind, as we see some of these merger talks going on, I have often wondered if Top Rank isn't waiting to see some different ownership deals move around. And one of the networks that's still just scratching the surface into live sports, it is ironic because it was one of the first pay cable outlets that had live sports, HBO. I still have this premonition that Top Rank could go back to HBO boxing and reestablish itself there. I could be way off base. I would love to see something like that happen, especially if there's a sale. But if I could wave the magic wand, the sanctioning bodies need to be brought to heel, first of all. They all have a handout. They all do, they are not looking for the best interests of the sport. They're looking for the best interests of their operations. Commissions, sanctioning bodies are businesses. Their business objectives do not always benefit the sport. If we could regulate that, calm that down, boil that down. I'm not sure that you need just one sanctioning body. And I think the genie got out of the bottle a long time ago. You're never going to stuff that in. Say what you will about all these belts. Fighters want the belts. Belts are leverage for them to get better paychecks, better deals. I'm all for whatever gets those guys paid, right? But there needs to be some unification over them to at least get them all to follow the same rules and cooperate with each other. On the other hand, the Ring Magazine belt does not charge a sanctioning fee, is overseen by a committee, including a lot of journalists, their ratings committee. And the rules are very, very strict about what level of fight gets to fight for a Ring Magazine belt. That's the one the fighters prize for a reason. Can we somehow consolidate the other belts to have some system similar to that? I am very tired of the interims and the secondary belts and the, Africa title, the Asia Pacific, the global. Make those some kind of ranking, but does everybody need a trinket to hang on to? That would help a lot of people. The average fan, if you ask the average fan, who is the middleweight champion? Well, they don't really know. And there are 4 guys who can claim to be the middleweight champion. Well, 3 right now, since one of them looks like he's going to be stripped. What is a unified champion? They don't know this stuff. If you ask who won the World Series, they know. If you ask them who won the Super Bowl, they know. How do we get there so that they know who the champion or the few are? Perhaps we need to dial back the number of divisions. I mean, are we at 18 divisions now? This is nuts. There's a sweet spot between the original, 8 and this, explosion of divisions we have now. Let's boil that back down to a reasonable 13. And let's stop this nonsense of inserting a division here and a bridger weight here. And I mean, that would force more people to fight against each other. It would help tremendously. But, the great Larry Merchant said it the best. Boxing, you can't fix it and you can't kill it. I mean, that's the bottom line. We can chop away at the margins. Yeah, but boxing is its own animal. It really is. And deep down, that's part of the charm of it in a way, isn't it? Right? Yeah. Even as it frustrates us so much sometimes. But let's tidy up the obvious stuff, right? Let's go after that low-hanging fruit. Let's maybe consolidate some divisions. Let's bring the sanctioning bodies to heel. And if it takes the promoters, great. We never thought we would see, for example, Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren sitting together at a fight, yucking it up, watching all their fighters fight each other. Or Bob Arum and Oscar De La Hoya, doing business. They have somewhat been forced to because they have to follow the money. Yep. But it means that when the conditions are right, it is possible. And that gives me some hope.
Well, no, it's a really interesting take because sometimes we're kind of down on how money has gotten too much into boxing. Jamieson and I have talked about this ad nauseum, but you're right. I mean, it can be a motivator for what we want to see. But before we get into picks, Jamieson, do you have another one to jump in with?
Yes. So obviously, there's several hot spots for boxing in the country. You're from the West. You have West Coast roots. From San Diego, of course. LA is close. Of course, Vegas is close. What's the difference between boxing on the East Coast and boxing on the West Coast?
Well, interestingly enough, I've had a very short period of 3 or 4 years right before the pandemic, actually, where I worked for Main Events out of New Jersey for Kathy Duva. And so I was involved in a lot of the promotions back east versus promotions that you see here in the West Coast, primarily, as you said, Las Vegas and LA. And part of it follows the fighters themselves, the culture of the region, the personality types of the region. Everybody, whether it's true or not, has a picture in their mind of someone's from Los Angeles or Southern California, right? And someone who's from New York or New Jersey. And the flavor of those personalities. New York and New Jersey area has been a hotbed of club fights and guys, hard, scrappy guys rising up through the ranks, through places like Joe DeGuardia's Star Boxing, through main events, who developed a lot of local fighters, who ran lower, sort of lower tier cards that I would say maybe were club fights plus. And the objective was signing guys who were fan friendly, who could put meat in the seats, sell tickets, right? So you had that flavor of, rough and ready, competitors, many of whom went on to become champions. And you had a similar culture, but driven by the Latino experience, in particular in Southern California. But the one thing they both share is, let's face it, nobody gets into boxing. It's always dangerous to use the word nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very few, a tiny fraction of boxers get in. The mass majority do not come from an affluent background, right? Boxing is a very tough sport. It's, very few people's first choice of a way to make a living. But it's accessible. It's a sport that when you first start, you don't need teammates. You don't need a lot of equipment. You need, the desire and will to get in there and train and have someone get a pair of gloves out of a box, a dozen at the side of the gym, strap them on you. Yeah, they fit okay, and go at it, right? And you've seen a lot of guys rise from poverty because they're so driven to get to the top because they want to feed their families. And, it's almost every Mexican fighter that ever lived fits that category. Every guy from a blue collar background on the East Coast, everyone who, was hanging on by a fingernail, starving, through rough winters in Eastern Europe and some of the Soviet breakaway republics. They all have this same thing in common, that this is their way out. That's the kind of motivator someone needs to stay in the sport long enough and train hard enough to be good at it, and then have that, tiny percentage of a chance of making life-changing money. And to this day, even though boxing is no longer a mainstream sport, especially in North America, if you ever look at the list of highest paid athletes that Forbes magazine still puts together, there are always a significant number of boxers in the top 20, which is really saying something given the eye-popping salaries guys are making at the highest levels of the big professional sports that are so popular: soccer, NFL, NBA, Shohei Ohtani.
Definitely. Now, where do you prefer doing business at, whether it's covering a fight or promoting a fight? Do you prefer the West Coast or the East Coast in that regard?
Well, from a purely selfish aspect, having to fly to the East Coast is a pain in the what.
Right.
And, I will certainly do it. And, once I'm there, I enjoy the hell out of it. There truly is nowhere like Madison Square Garden to see a fight to this day. The last fight I attended there was the big all women's card that MVP put on in July. Spectacular, backed by Netflix money, done beautifully, promoted beautifully, fan events at the highest level. Just couldn't have been run better, staged better. And while the main event didn't necessarily rise to expectations, boy, a lot of those undercard fights were just phenomenal. Loved it. But, when Vegas is an hour plane flight or a 5-hour drive,
Mhm.
And there's so many good venues there, from smaller up to the, big arenas. And of course, now we have Allegiant Stadium in the
That's
play,
right.
apparently.
That's
But
right.
believe me, T-Mobile Arena is plenty big. It about 10%, seats about 10-15% more than Madison Square Garden does at 23,000 plus if they really pack it. Um, you can't beat a Vegas fight. I can kind of, as long as I remember to apply for a credential, I can kind of make the call. I'm like, yeah, am I going to go? I don't know. Should I get in the car now? And the truth is, for me, all of my family now lives in Las Vegas. Every one of them, one by one, moved from San Diego to Las Vegas. So that's, it's kind of a nice bonus. The fight scene in Las Vegas has changed and developed, and um, it used to be in its heydays in the 80s and 90s. Not a lot of fighters lived and trained there, but now they do. And the critical mass of gyms, of world-class trainers operating out of Las Vegas, and the sparring that's now there full time, that has really evolved in the last 10 years or so. You need to give a little bit of a nod to guys like Floyd Mayweather, um, Sean and Kenny Porter's gym, some of the other longtime gyms that have, generated their own ecosystem there. That has been a plus. That's something that the East Coast always had from the get-go, that Las Vegas had to develop. The sparring in Los Angeles is still really unparalleled on the West Coast, and there's still a lot of fighters. If you're west of the Mississippi and you want high level sparring, a lot of guys still come to Los Angeles. Now you have a lot of the Asian fighters, particularly the Japanese fighters, coming into Los Angeles for the world class sparring they want. Then you also have, growing scenes like Houston, which is, got its own boxing scene that's very high level. You have a lot of fighters now down in Florida. They live there. They don't have to pay taxes on their money. You have Cuban fighters much more able to come and perform in North America. Um, you have odd little pockets like, you know, Team Crawford in Omaha. Well, a lot of guys have gone there as well. So I think that diversity is awfully nice, and it opens the doors a lot more to a lot more fighters, including the women's professional fighters that are starting to really grow that side of the sport. But given the choice, and my own personal selfishness, oh yeah, I'll go to Vegas any day. Just that's just so much easier. And a fight week, depending on the card, can be really big in Las Vegas. However, I will say the Taylor Serrano 3 all women's card MVP put on, that was big talk all over New York. Surprisingly so. Fight posters in bars everywhere, not just the Irish bars, okay? Everywhere. So I was very impressed with that. That carnival boxing culture is still there in New York. I would hate to see that go away.
Yeah, and we're big supporters, Jamieson and I, of women's boxing as well. There's a lot of boxing fans that are just very, they have a lot to say about women in women's sports in general. But
Like
not us, not us.
Okay.
Right. We're not about that. We support boxers 100% here. But yeah, let's switch tracks and get into the picks of 2025. I don't see how anybody's top fight of 2025 is going to be different. It's going to be a surprise, but I don't know. Just give us, I don't know, if you have top three maybe of your fights of the year.
I sure will. I think an early candidate, because it was such an event as much as it was a fight, was finally seeing Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn get in the ring, right? Yeah. What a spectacle. What a buildup. If someone scripted that as a feature film, someone would think, I'm not quite sure this is all believable. And you cannot tell me that you didn't stand up off your couch when you saw Chris Eubank Sr. get out of that limo, who showed up to see his son fight for their family honor. And the fight, was very competitive. It it might not have produced any one spectacular moment in the ring, but it had a lot of that tension, a lot of that cultural pride. I think that's on anyone's short list. It really has to be. And then you fast forward a few months, and we always expect to have a really great fight on Cinco de Mayo weekend. And you had this big, multi-continental card, all this stuff going on, and Canelo making his first appearance in Riyadh, that Times Square card that was so talked up. I mean, how much more of a disaster could all of that been? I mean, it was just cringeworthy, right? It was just the worst.
We were not happy. We were not happy.
Oh, I mean, the New York fight was bad enough. And I sat and watched that card in the Top Rank offices with a bunch of the staff, with the chairman himself, with Cynthia Poncher and a whole bunch of people. Christina Poncher, pardon me. And I mean, that was just a face palm the whole way through. It was just horrible. Then I take a break. I go over to my sister's house, and they said, I got to watch this card from Saudi Arabia. It was even worse. It was worse, the worst. But I was there in Las Vegas to cover that forgotten third card on Sunday night, the return of Noah Inoue after many years away from the United States, facing this, scrappy young Mexican guy from San Antonio, who I had sat and talked to at length when he came out to Los Angeles for a media day. And his trainer at the time, Joel Diaz, was so high on him. And I thought, Joel is not a hype man, right? And I watched Cardenas going through, your typical media workout with Joel. And I thought, okay, all right, well, let's hope he gives a good account of himself. That card was thrilling top to bottom. It was everything those other two bloated, overpaid, overhyped produced cards were not. It was a shame that the T-Mobile Arena was not full. Shame on everyone who failed to fill any empty seat in that arena. But the 10,000 plus or so of us that were there were treated to an absolutely phenomenal evening with all the bells and whistles, with the big ring walks, with that shocker of a knockdown by Cardenas of Noah Inoue. Let me tell you, we were not certain he was going to get to his feet and stay on his feet. He was wobbly. But that's the muscle memory, instinct, and determination of a champion that, forced him to go forward and then turn that fight around. And some great moments on the undercard, a very impressive knockout once again by, spoiler alert, my prospect of the year, Emiliano Vargas, who looks, at this point to be the real thing. So that's got to also be there as the fight of the year to me, that main event between Inoue and Cardenas. And the framework and timing of that fight around it really lent to putting the spotlight on why, to me, it was a big event. But then go 3 months down, 4 or 5 months down the road, and a few miles down the road to Allegiant Stadium, and you cannot deny the impact of a card like Canelo versus Bud Crawford, with the surprising outcome at the end. So, what's your fight of the year? I'd say you could pick any of the three and absolutely justify what the fight of the year was. You might pick something different for the event of the year, right? Mm-hmm. And I would argue that really it winnows down to either Eubank Ben or Canelo Crawford as your event of the year. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna I think be an outlier as we read all of our lists that are out there right now. And I admit to the bias of having been ringside, but the Inoue versus Cardenas fight, from a pure fighter's perspective, to me, that's the fight of the year. It didn't have the expectations, the build-up, the promotion, the volume, the eyeballs. That's still my fight of the year.
Awesome. No, it was a wonderful night. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would put the other two right up there. I would add Abdullah Mason and Sam Noakes, as a
Mhm.
another fight in that category. Um, I also am very partial to a fight that was not for a title, did not involve Americans. But the heavyweight fight between British fighters Dave Allen and Johnny Fisher was an absolute slobber knocker. If you love the heavyweights, that's your fight. Um, I could even make an argument just for spectacular results sake of earlier in the year, Moses Itama absolutely wiping out Dillian White. I mean, he just flew right through him. And we all thought, yeah, here's the first big test for this young heavyweight. White's going to take him into the deep waters. No, it didn't. He did not. And it did not happen. So, a lot of good choices.
Yeah, great list, and you seem to never miss a fight, which I like that. I try to catch every one, so even the lesser known ones, that's
Sometimes it's
great.
a hard one. You just, once in a while, there's a fight I don't see, but that's why there's YouTube. Come on, guys.
That's true. Yeah, that's how I watch. I'm sorry, that's how I watch all of Inoue's fights because man, I'm not getting up at 3-4 in the morning. I'm just not going to do it.
It is really hard. If you're on the West Coast, you can kind of try to get yourself to sleep by maybe 10 o'clock, and maybe you miss the first few fights on the card, and you get a 3 or 4 hours sleep, you wake yourself up, you watch, you go back to bed.
That's
Now, if you're really hardcore like me, a couple of 2 weekends ago, we had the fight card from Africa, and we had one from Ghana, and then the next night you had one in Nigeria, both on DAZN. I'm on Sunday night. I'm catching up on the card from Nigeria, right? Just because you can watch it. And DAZN streams so many international cards that really don't get a lot of coverage in a lot of boxing publications. And there's some gems on those cards. It's well worth, even after the fact, going back to see, how did this all play out? Is there something that I missed that maybe I should go back and look at? That is the plus of streaming. We have all of that content accessible and available for us. So we just have to balance the price points.
Yeah, well, that's a great list. Like I said, let's switch tracks to looking forward. Any fights that you're looking forward to specifically, dream fights you want to, and also who's next for 2026? Who's the big name that we're looking for? We thought it was going to be Crawford now that he's a star, but he's walking away with a win. So what do we have to look forward to?
So, we have to ask ourselves, is Bud really retired? Is he really retired? Or, Sugar Ray Leonard famously said when he came out of retirement, somebody asked him, what about it? What happened? Why did you decide not to be retired anymore? He says, well, none of us ever really retire. We just change our minds. So is Bud going to change his mind? Is it a money ploy? We've heard those rumors that the reason he decided to retire is because he wanted more money for a Canelo rematch that he wasn't being offered. I'm not sure that's it. To me, one of the tells is, bless him, Crawford has always marched to the beat of his own drum. He is his own personality with his own, set of internal morals and guidelines. I'm not sure he would be just retiring to take a pause if he hadn't done that incredibly well-produced video announcement, which clearly took some time to do. That was long in the making. That was not an overnight, I'm going to announce tomorrow night I'm retiring on Instagram with a post. That was a very slickly produced, thoughtful comment on his career and his decision. I'm not sure you do that if your real objective is 3 months from now to say, for the right money, I'll come back. Bud has always had a life outside boxing, right? He's got a wonderful family. He has a community where he really belongs. He is loyal to the soil in Omaha. He's involved in the community. He coaches a couple of his boys in wrestling. I could really see him going down the road, that Philip Rivers did until he decided to unretire.
See that?
He's coaching kids football, right? Bud doesn't have quite as many kids as Rivers does, but maybe he wants to enjoy his family and his money. Maybe he has seen some of the fighters of previous generations who stayed too long, whose health is showing the effects of that. He doesn't have that right now. If he wants to live a long, healthy life, I think it will stick. I think it will stick the same way it stuck for Andre Ward. He went out at the top. Ward has certainly been tempted a couple of times. He just has come and straddled that line about coming out of retirement, but he's never crossed it. I think that might happen with Crawford. I think he's done. And we are seeing this generation start to ease out. So who's coming up next? Every time we've lost some of the big stars to retirement or something, something else, someone has always risen to replace them. And maybe we don't really know right now. It looks like, Crawford's out. I do think Canelo is on his way out. He's got 2 more fights on his deal with the Riyadh season. Right. So let's see what he decides to do with those. He's always said he was going to retire at 37. Well, that gives him another, year and a half to get that done. Anyway, he's going to be around at least a little while longer. I would think several more years. But who's coming along behind them? I think that we do have some American stars if they're marketed correctly. I do think as long as his skills hold up, Emiliano Vargas is Oscar De La Hoya 2.0. I think there's a lot of potential there if they move him right. Abdullah Mason, same, as a Midwestern fighter, and he kind of slides into that place where Crawford held court. Very exciting fighter. Shakur Stevenson, merits that status, and he showed us against William Zepeda he can put on an exciting fight. He can do it.
Yep.
So this upcoming fight with him and Teofimo Lopez is really going to test their marketability and their star power beyond the hardcore fans as much as what they do in the ring. So I'm very interested to see that. I'm also looking to, fighters outside our shores. And though boxing is a niche sport in the United States, that is not true in Mexico. That is not true in Great Britain. That is not true in Japan. There's a lot of talent there. We have the ability to see it through streaming. I am very excited to see what Moses Atama does this year. He wanted to be the youngest heavyweight champion ever. Well, he didn't accomplish that. But damn it, he might become a world champion, especially if Usyk starts giving those belts up by 22 or 3, and that would be a stellar accomplishment. It's time to get him in with some, tougher opposition. He has certainly proved he can handle it, and I'm very excited to see what happens there. There's some other lower level guys right now that I still think of as prospects that have some potential, and I have some West Coast bias there. I'm very interested in Tito Mercado. I'm very interested in Joel Iriarte, who is signed to Golden Boy, who's still I don't think he even still has 10 fights yet. I hope against hope that we've got at least one American heavyweight to carry the banner. We've got 2 young guys, they're still right at the beginning of their careers, but Joshua Edwards and Jamal Harvey, fingers crossed, guys, that they can carry the ball. There's a lot of potential matchups out there I'm excited about. Bam Rodriguez, I don't care who's standing in front of him. I'll see that fight. I think we'll stop right there, but okay. There's plenty to enjoy, and they don't all have to be championship fights. Sugar Nunez is another guy I would, walk across hot coals to see, who always puts on exciting fights.
No, I really appreciate you specifically bringing up the American heavyweights because we've talked about it as well. You know, the rankings have what I think the one that comes to mind is Jared the Big Baby Anderson, which
Well,
I was
yeah, what a flame out. What
right.
the hell happened?
I
I mean,
was rooting for him, but yeah, I mean, clearly that's not
well, it's interesting to me that he was among that posse of heavyweight sparring partners that Jake Paul brought in, right? Um, and he was, and I was very surprised to see that Jared Anderson was one of them. I'm not sure what that portends. What it tells me is he hasn't given up the sport entirely, clearly, if he decided he'd come get a paycheck to be a sparring partner. Let's see what happens to him this year, but I hope he has spent this time out of the ring getting his head straight and his mind right, deciding, do I really want to do this or not? From the few photos I saw, he looked like he was in, training ready shape. But, the development pipeline for American heavyweight talent has been siphoned off by the NFL, by the NBA, by pro wrestling, for Christ's sake. I mean, these guys have more opportunity, even college football and basketball. With NIL money, those guys can make big, big paychecks at a young age, and they don't have to get smacked in the face.
Right.
So if you're a big American athlete, I can absolutely see why a lot of the potential heavyweight talent is being siphoned off elsewhere. It does concern me. One of these days, I keep telling myself I'm going to write a long, thoughtful article about this. Maybe you guys have finally gotten me off the fence to do it.
We'd love to read it. I've read some of your writing and it's wonderful. So
Thank you, Greg.
got one more thing. Jameson, do you have anything else you want to jump in with?
No, I'm good. My biggest thing is this. When it comes to boxing in general, how do you sell fans on the sport going forward? Because we're boxing like purists. Like we eat, sleep, drink, everything boxing. As someone who covers it and also works in the industry, how do you sell the casuals and the people who tune in when there's like a big event? How do you sell them on the sport besides those events?
You get them to a fight. You get them inside the arena. One of my big concerns, and Luis, you used the absolutely perfect adjective for me. I meant to comment on this. The uneasiness we feel about the influx of the Saudi money and the Saudi influence, and the Saudis buying, the Bible of boxing, our major publication, is a concern to me. Although many of my colleagues who I think very highly of working for them, I trust that they will hold the highest standards, be that as it may. Part of the problem with this is that so many of the big fights and the undercard opportunities have moved outside the United States. These big cards that are happening in Riyadh used to be happening here. And they weren't only happening in Las Vegas, LA, or New York. They were happening in Houston or Dallas or Florida or Cleveland or, go down the list. When I can get some of my friends or colleagues or people I know or my brother's new girlfriend or whoever it is to go to a fight and sit there and see it in person, they are hooked. Kathy Duva, when I worked for her at Main Events, I came to see the wisdom of her approach of spending so much time and energy on developing local fighters who brought in local fans, to see the guys they knew, their friends, the person in their neighborhood or they went to school with or, came from their town. But they also got to see all the other fighters. And if they were the guys in the low undercard and they stuck around to see the, more seasoned talent, once you have seen a fight card in person, and hopefully it isn't the Times Square card, right? It's got something to offer. I think you make a fan for life. You really do. Club fights from the small promoters, they're hanging by a thread. And we need to, as a boxing media community, I firmly believe we need to give as much support as possible to the Salida promotions of the world, the Star Boxing promotions of the world. The smaller operations out here, there's still, a dozen of them on the West Coast and Southern California. But it used to be for years and years Thompson Boxing, who grew a lot of homegrown talent. The community of boxing enthusiasts who developed more in the northern part of California, those are the folks who will absolutely fill the biggest arena in not the biggest city, Fresno, California. They have an arena that seats about, I think, 16,000.
Yep.
They've developed that Northern California talent. They get the fans there, with club fights and cheap seats. They fill that arena. And those same fans, a small portion of them will say, I'm going to buy that pay-per-view. I'm going to follow this guy who isn't from my town because I'm really enjoying this. We cannot lose that. I would really like to see more of these domestic fighters getting the big paychecks in Saudi say, I'll give you a fight in Riyadh, but I want to fight back at home. And we've got to keep doing that. You have fighters, like Shakur Stevenson, who can sell out in New Jersey and environs. When he was still in the game, we don't really know what's going to happen with Tank Davis. But Tank Davis could fill Barclays, could fill arenas in Baltimore. Keyshawn Davis was there to sell out in Norfolk until he wet the bed. Now he's coming back. Let's see what happens.
Yep.
That is what needs to happen to keep boxing at least healthy enough for the next few years.
Got to say, we love your takes. We love your knowledge. We love your passion. And all the things you're talking about are things that, Jameson and I knock back and forth as well, So you seem to have a really good idea of where the fight game is now.
I think
and
those of us who've been around and absorbed, we all come to the same correct conclusions, and maybe we take different avenues to get there. But we know what it's like to sit there ringside, and we know what it's like to see the up-and-coming talent and how hard they work. And some make it and some don't. In the pluses and minuses, I think uneasiness is the perfect word, because it means there's still a lot of promise out there. It's kind of like life right now. There's some
That's
uneasiness,
fair.
but that means there's still room for optimism. There's still room for it.
Absolutely. What a great way to start the year. Actually, last question, since we do talk about pop culture on the show as well. Do you have a favorite boxing movie?
This is going to sound funny. I'm not the biggest overall fan of boxing movies because it's so hard to get it right. It just has to be off a little bit. This is a question I often ask boxers who I interview on my YouTube channel. I fire off changes a little bit from time to time, but I fire off a dozen sort of oddball questions, because they have been asked the same stuff a billion times. And I always ask them what their favorite movie is. So far, by far the majority of boxers who I ask name the movie Southpaw, which really shocks me, right? Mine is an old school classic. It's got to be Raging Bull.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about Southpaw on the show. We weren't thrilled about it. We thought it was.
It got a lot of. It got a lot of criticism. It did, but over and over they'll say, "Yeah, my favorite is," and I think I'm going to hear, Cinderella Man or Rocky or Creed. I really thought that would come up with a lot of fighters. Oh no, I hear Southpaw over and over.
Interesting.
That's just not what I've ever expected to hear. But for me, Raging Bull, I think the grittiness of it, the reality of it, and it did get a lot of the details right. It really did.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. Before we let you go, we want to give you a chance to plug that YouTube channel, website you're writing, anything you want, social media handles, please.
Well, see that name right there under me? There's only one of me. You Google that, assuming you can spell it right, and I get it, it's a lot to ask. But if you pop that up, you're going to find me. There's only one Gayle Falkenthal in the world. But easier is my writing is at nyfights.com, nyfights.com. I get it. I'm in San Diego, but I write for NY Fights. And my YouTube channel is under my name, but it's Gayle Falkenthal on boxing. And it's primarily a lot of interviews. And I tend to interview, not the big superstars, but the talents I think you should know. But occasionally you'll see a familiar name. One of my favorite interviews last year was with Hamza Shiraz, who's an absolute delight to interview. Cecilia Braque says she was about to, come in and have one last retirement fight, which, thankfully she won. So I think she's finally done. Gabriela Fondora has always been one of my very favorite interviews, as is her brother. So I pop them on when I can get them. And right now I'm waiting on Caden Griffiths, who's a prospect with Golden Boy, who I think's got a lot of talent. So that should be the next one coming up, maybe another week or so.
Okay, great. And I got to mention,
if you see me at the fights, come say hi, right?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I'm not hard to spot on Media Row.
I do got to mention you have been very committed to trying to get boxing content on Blue Sky, which I'm on Blue Sky. There's not a lot of it. I'm trying to grind and get that going. So, our show is still very humble on there because we didn't.
Well,
we started the show for something.
Connected, and I'm thrilled that you did that. It's going to be hard to pry people away from boxing Twitter. I get that, and I'm there, but Blue Sky is a little more congenial environment, and I think that we're just smarter, nicer, more fun people over there. I'm just going to say it.
I would agree. No offense to the one guy here who's still on boxing Twitter, Jamieson.
I'm still there. Oh no.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
You got to engage. I mean, and nobody ever accused boxing of having too many, manners. So, we got to play in all these playgrounds.
Yeah. And also, to be fair, I'm not on boxing Twitter because I was banned. I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, so we really appreciate you being here.
We'll talk about that offline.
Definitely. Yeah. But
inquiring minds need to know.
Yeah. Well, how about this? Not only that, but how about we talk more and you come back on the show? Because again, we love your knowledge and passion, and there's going to be a lot more to talk about in 2026. So are you willing to come back on?
Anytime. Thank you very much. Excellent. And look forward to it.
Excellent. Well, have a good 2026, Gayle. And yeah, we'll be talking to you soon. See you later.
Happy New Year and a belated season's beatings to everybody.
Yes. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing interview with Gayle Falkenthal. She was awesome. Jamieson, how'd you feel about that?
No, that was really cool. Like, she's someone that works in the industry, but also doesn't have a huge ego that's intimidating. A lot of people with her standing would be more like aggressive with their tone and their knowledge. Instead, she was very complimentary of us, herself, her knowledge, her experience in the sport of boxing. You can't do anything but to love that. So amazing guest, probably our best guest thus far.
100%. I guess best suited to just kind of our styles, our opinions, just kind of somebody who's on the same wavelength as us. Just super, super excited to have her on, and absolutely going to have her back. No question. Cool. Well, this episode ran long because Gayle was such an amazing guest. So let's wrap it up let's wrap up 2025 and ball it up and toss it behind us. So I wanted to talk about our top fights of the year. Overall, I was looking back at the fights I really enjoyed. The year started off strong. There was like 4 fights in February that were awesome. Three fights in February that were absolutely awesome. Maybe kind of a lag in the middle, and then the big Crawford Canelo event at the end of the year. Do you have some fights this year that really, really stuck with you?
So, of course, she made a great point. Event and fight are 2 different things. So, like, for instance, Canelo Crawford, or Crawford, however you want to put it, that's probably the best event of the year for a lot of different reasons. The fight was good as well, like boxing-wise. But I wouldn't say it's the best fight of the year, but it was by far the best event because of all the things that took place, all things were at stake, and all that jazz. So I think in general, when it comes to the best fight, you can put that in there. But when she mentioned the best event, it's like, that's interesting because the event and fight are two different things. Again, Eubank versus Ben was good. The problem I have with the Naoya Inoue fights is I like to talk about the fights I've seen live. I ain't waking up at 4 a.m. like, with all due respect.
But hold on. But wait, no, that was the one in Cinco de Mayo where he was in Vegas. So I saw that live at 8 p.m. So that one was
in general
different.
Though. I can't go, the fight he had in Tokyo where it was at 3:30 our time. That's not fair because I didn't necessarily watch that live. Right. So it's kind of tough. But if we're talking about performance based and what things meant, man, that's such a great question. Because here's the thing. Lamont Roach had a hell of a 2025.
Yes.
A hell of a 2025. You can't tell me his performances is any worse or any someone had a better performance of 25 than he has. You can't. You can't. And you can either pick either fight. Of course, the fight versus Tank is the one that's going to be known for a lot of reasons and whatnot. But to me, in my opinion, I think the fight he had with Tank is just as big as anything because of what's taken place since that. And also, it helped launch a career. It helped launch somebody's that we had. Lamont Roach was on nobody's radar this time last year. He was on when he got announced versus Tank, we were like, all right, well, there's a speed bump to eventually Tank and Shakur. That's what we're all thinking. But then he fights 6 months later, fights very well. So to me, one of his fights has to be on that list just because of everything that sparked since then. And hell, you can make an argument that he may have retired Tank. He may have beat the boxing out of Tank. There's a possibility that may be the case, as crazy as that sounds. So yeah, I would put that fight in there. Man, I was very happy to see, and even Gayle made it a point to mention that Shakur Stevenson was actually aggressive for the first time in a long time in a fight. Now, it doesn't necessarily make it the best fight of the year per se, or in that list, but it was good to see a contender improve upon a flaw and show it out versus an opponent that's not like a tomato can. That's a pretty good opponent. So that was like I guess it played more of a moment per se, but the fight is tough because when you think about events and moments and fights, it's kind of tough to kind of break it all down like that. With that being said, I will say this, and you're not going to like this. Anthony Joshua breaking dude's face is the best boxing moment of the year. God damn it. And only because it involved injury, not because of boxing. Hopefully this madness stops. Hopefully we ain't got to deal with this shit no more. But a dude's face being broken 2 spots is amazing to me. And I'm glad the charade is finally ending.
I wasn't even going to say shit about this because I don't think it's over. I think Clown is going to come back. Mr. Clown's going to come back.
When your face is like that, because here's the thing, Luis, something went wrong. Either the script was wrong or somebody missed the memo, but dude's face is gone. And you don't come back. You don't box again after that. Okay. Your face look like his face look, it's over. It's over.
I mean, okay, I can appreciate that. Yes, if this absolutely is the end of the Paul Clown show, then I'm happy. But here's the thing: I couldn't even enjoy it because I just don't care about him. I don't care. I
didn't be notified of what happened. I didn't watch. I was being told, hey, it's not rigged. Dude's in there fighting for his life, and then 2 minutes later, dude got knocked out. Oh, his face is broke. I was like, oh, great. But I'm not paying no mind to it or whatever. I'm just glad that charade is finally over and that he got in with a real boxer. Also, prayers up to Anthony Joshua. He just survived a crazy car crash, and he lost 2 people. His trainer and I think his nutritionist or something like that, or his corner guy.
Someone else from his team, in Nigeria. Yeah. He was a passenger, and I got Latif Ayodele and Sinagami. Yeah. That's
prayers up to him. I'm glad he's survived that because we don't have many good boxers with like branding that people know of already, and to lose one of his stature would really suck. Like really suck. It sucked to lose anybody, but to lose an established heavyweight that we know of and we're aware of, and it would be very bad for the sport. So I'm glad he survived. It sucks that his team, had those subtractions, but hopefully he's able to recover and get back on track.
Yeah. You know what? I'll say one good thing that came out of this debacle, other than dude getting his face broken. A lot of ladies discovered Anthony Joshua, non-boxing fans, and they have been absolutely loving the look of that very handsome, very pretty man. And good
correct.
for them, good for him. So you know what, Anthony Joshua, get your flowers from the ladies. Yeah, get your ladies, get your thirst on. Good for him. But yeah, but yeah, I'm. You know what? Absolutely, man. I would be very happy if this is the last we heard of Jake Paul in boxing. And you know what? I'll even be even more gracious because it's 2026 and we're all starting the year off right in a positive mess. Let him come back and keep promoting women's boxing. Let him keep back and promoting prospects. Absolutely, I will absolutely be happy if he goes back. If he continues doing that, just stay out of the damn ring, stay off my TV. So
right.
Anyway, so yeah, for me, I noticed at the beginning of the year, David Benavidez versus David Morrell was February 1st, Battle of the Davids. February is my birth month, so there's a lot going on. Better Bia versus Vivo was February 22nd, which was this amazing fight. And then one in particular that I really gonna give credit to, I always get very personal, like how I felt watching the fight and the vibe and everything. Keyshawn Davis versus Dennis Berinchek, February 14th. I was in Texas, in Austin, visiting family out there, and I got to watch that entire card of boxing at different bars in downtown Austin, because back then Top Rank was on ESPN, so they just had the fights on. And for the main event, went over to this Mexican restaurant. They had a big TV in the middle, and I asked them, "Can you please put ESPN on the TV?" The manager there did it for me. That was a really fun fight. Really like very, very loud place with the DJ playing reggaeton Latin music, but the sound of the fight was also on. And it was just a great vibe, like a great night. I remember that was a fourth round knockout. Keyshawn Davis at that time was, at the top of the game and was going to be one of the next biggest stars. And that fight also kind of shows where he was in February to where we are now and what happened with his flame out, as Gayle said. So I think that's a very important fight just to kind of see how quickly fortunes can change for a fighter. And he will be back on the Teofimo Shakur card, and we'll just see where he's at. He did go up in weight because he missed weight because he said he had trouble meeting. I can't remember off the top of my head what weight he actually missed, but he's sticking to where he's going to be. So maybe Keyshawn will actually live up to that potential. I don't know. But that's a fight that really sticks with me from this year. Yeah, I'm glad Gayle mentioned Inoue versus Cardenas because that was a great night. That was not just a great fight, but a nice salve, a balm after that Cinco de Mayo terrible weekend. So it was nice that Naoya Inoue saved Cinco de Mayo weekend and just put on a great performance. Yeah, him getting he got knocked down for the second time in his career, both times by Mexican guys. So and he just fought another Mexican, David Picasso, who went the distance. So all of these guys surviving, going into the ring with Naoya Inoue and not dying, I think they're going to get a lot of high fives on the way back home, back in Mexico for their performances. So respect to them. But yeah, that was a Sunday night, which was kind of, not really prime night for boxing, but I had a great time. And yeah, it was really nice to bounce back from the stupid Times Square thing that I've complained about many times.
The Times Square was a low light, and the Keyshawn Davis in Virginia was a low light as well, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. Keyshawn's his whole missing weight, and then that whole weird thing where there was a fight backstage, maybe or maybe not. Like, what the hell is that all about? Yeah, that definitely was a black eye in the sport of boxing. No pun intended. But yeah, in terms of pure spectacle and as an event, God, it cannot be that night of Canelo Crawford. All that anticipation, all the fight had been talked about for a year. It was just like very cathartic to finally see it and experience it. So I don't know. I mean, I would put Canelo Crawford top of the list. Of course, Bud, fighter of the year. The biggest dud is the Times Square Riyadh event. But no, I mean, this was kind of weird year because, especially after that interview, it's kind of hard to pick one thing. You know, it was a good year for boxing discussion.
Right.
There are highlights, lowlights, and that's
Mhm.
what we're here to do. So boxing, you made 2025 a good year for the Mixed Company podcast, even when you sucked. So we thank you, and we hope that 2026 is even better. Oh,
Most definitely. Most definitely.
right. Well, let's get out of here, Jameson. Where can people find you on social media?
Twitter at the Jamieson. Can't wait for late January. We have a big boxing night. It's gonna be fun. Of course, we'll be on a couple times before then, but it's gonna be a great event. Shakur Stevenson. This is his time to be. If Crawford is truly retiring, which I still don't 100% believe. I'm getting there, but I don't 100% believe it. Shakur Stevenson is the next star in the sport, and he starts that journey now. If that's truly the case.
I another thing that Gayle said that I realized when she mentioned Crawford's goodbye video on YouTube with all the production, that's what makes me think as well that he's actually retiring. I don't think it's a ploy.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw that, I'm like, oh, he is for real. It's not just a tweet that said,
Right.
I retire from boxing. I think Tech did that, didn't he? Did he just like, I officially retire through a tweet or an Instagram story?
Unless he's playing the long game, right? If he's playing the, hey, I need 150 million or else, then all right, I get it. But
sure.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely possible. Don't get me wrong. I'll just say that I'm where I am right now, where I'm sitting at the moment. I believe it. So
same.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. You can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. All the handles are the same at Mixed Co Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. Leave us a 5-star review. It helps us out more than you can possibly know. Watch us on YouTube. The link is on the show notes, or find out our playlist on the 19 Media Group channel. We have an official show email address. If you have any questions for the mailbag, fun stories about watching boxing and Mixed Company, send it all to letters@mixedcopodcast.com. Don't forget, we drop new episodes every other Thursday, so please join us again. January 15th, 2026, the new year. We're just getting started, baby. We got Mas Fuego from the boxing world. We have been the Mixed Company Podcast, a 19 Media Group production. Thank you so much for listening, and salud.